My name is Walter Drummond. I am 69 years old, and I am a retired architect. To my only son, Damon, I am just a simple old man, a burden he has to take care of in my old age. He and his new wealthy in-laws certainly thought so. I know this because I came home a day early from my trip. I found my wife Carolyn crying all alone in our living room. But from the kitchen, I could hear my son laughing. He was laughing loudly with his in-laws as they measured my walls, planning to move me and my wife down into the basement. They thought I was finished. They thought I was powerless. They didn't know that the simple old man they were trying to throw away was secretly a multimillionaire. And they didn't know that I had already set the trap for them. The flight out of Houston had been smooth. I decided not to call ahead. At 69, you don't stumble across many opportunities to surprise the woman you've spent 45 years loving. I let myself imagine Carolyn's face, that slow, quiet smile that still had a way of catching me off guard. I slid my key into the lock. The house was still. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here with me today. If stories like this one speak to you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments when someone you love deeply disappoints you. Do you believe in giving them a second chance? Or do you think some betrayals simply cannot be undone? Now, a quick note. Some details in this story have been shaped for dramatic storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to specific real individuals or events is purely coincidental. What matters most is the truth at the heart of it. Too quiet. Carolyn. I called out, setting my carry-on bag down in the foyer. I'm home, baby. The only answer was a muffled sound drifting from the living room. I walked in, and my good mood disappeared. Carolyn was curled up on the sofa, the one we'd picked out together back in 1984. Her shoulders were trembling. She was crying the deep, painful kind that cuts straight through a man. Carolyn, honey. What is it? What's wrong? She startled, flinching at the sound of my voice. Her eyes were swollen and red. Walter, you're not supposed to be home until tomorrow. I caught an earlier flight. What happened? Did somebody hurt you? She shook her head, pressing her hands against her wet cheeks. They're here, Walter, in the kitchen. I went still. Even as she said it, another sound broke through the quiet of the house. Laughter, coming straight from my kitchen. It was my son, Damon. But he wasn't alone. Mixed in with his voice was the sharp, aristocratic laugh of his mother-in-law, Vivian Hartwell. Who's here, I asked, though my gut had already worked it out. Damon, Carolyn whispered, as if she was afraid to say it. And Celeste and her parents. They showed up about an hour ago. They're measuring. Measuring. The word didn't register at first. I left Carolyn on the sofa and moved down the hall toward the noise. The laughter swelled with every step. They were comfortable, at ease, happy even while my wife sat crying 20 feet away. I stopped in the doorway of my own kitchen. What I saw felt like a fist to the chest. Damon, my son, had one end of a metal tape measure stretched across the room. His wife, Celeste, was scribbling on a notepad, and her parents, Gerald and Vivian Hartwell, were posted up by my refrigerator, helping themselves to what looked like my good bourbon. I'm telling you, Gerald, Vivian said, swirling the glass. This whole wall has to come down. We knock it out, put a grand Carrara marble island right here. Gerald Hartwell. A man who perpetually looked as though he'd caught a bad smell gave a slow nod. Good bones, but everything else is dated. Look at this cabinetry. Oak. It's pathetic. Celeste laughed. I know, Daddy. It's terrible, but once the new appliances are in, it'll be stunning, won't it, Damon? My son, my 38-year-old son, just nodded, his eyes lit with a greedy hunger I had never once seen there before. It's going to be amazing, honey. Absolutely amazing. Damon. My voice sliced through the room. Damon let go of the tape measure. It hit the tile floor with a sharp metallic clatter. Dad. He went pale. Dad, what are you doing home? Your flight wasn't until tomorrow. I live here, I said. My voice pulled to a dangerous calm. A better question is, what exactly are you doing in here, and why is your mother weeping in the living room? The Hartwells turned to look at me. There was no surprise on their faces. No shame, just a flicker of irritation, the kind you'd aim at a servant who'd wandered into the wrong room. "Oh, Walter, you're back," Vivian said, raising my bourbon to her lips. "Don't be so dramatic. Carolyn is just being emotional. We're only planning the remodel." "My remodel?" I asked. Celeste stepped forward. She was tall and angular, and her personality was cut from the same cloth. One hand landed on her hip. "Yes, Dad. We're telling you now. Damon and I are moving in." I looked at Damon. He wouldn't look back. His gaze was fixed on the floor like a boy caught in a lie. "Moving in." "Of course," Celeste said, as though I were slow to follow. "Our apartment is lovely, but it's rented. This house, well, it'll be Damon's eventually anyway. We might as well start putting our mark on it now. It's just the practical thing to do." I couldn't find words. I looked at the cabinets that Eugene, my father, had helped me install. I looked at the floor tiles Carolyn and I had laid ourselves one weekend in '92. Celeste kept going, oblivious. "We'll be taking the master bedroom naturally. It has the ensuite," she said, gesturing loosely toward the hall. "You and Carolyn can move your things down to the guest room in the basement. It's perfectly comfortable. And honestly, at your age, you don't need all that space, do you? It'll be far more convenient for everyone." The basement. They intended to move me into my own basement. I felt the blood leave my face. I had designed this house. I had drawn every blueprint myself. I had driven nails alongside the construction crew. This wasn't simply a house. It was the work of my life, and they were discussing it like a piece of furniture they could rearrange on a whim. "Get out." The words came out quiet, but they had weight. Celeste actually laughed. "Excuse me, what did you say?" I repeated it louder this time. "Get out of my house." Gerald Hartwell, who had stayed quiet until now, stepped forward. He was the kind of man who ran a hedge fund and had never once questioned his own authority. "Now see here, Walter, let's not act like children. We are family, and we are working out a practical solution for your situation. Your situation, your age," Vivian added, setting her glass down. "Your limited income. Damon has been very candid with us about his finances. We know what he contributes to help you each month." That hit me like something physical. Damon had helped me. I had never taken a single dime from my son, not one. "We think it's admirable," Vivian went on, her voice soaked in false warmth. "But it's a burden. Now that he's married to Celeste, we are his family as well. We've decided to carry that burden. We're going to take over this house, handle the bills, handle the upkeep. And in return," Gerald added, "you and Carolyn get a safe place to live right downstairs. It's more than fair." I turned to my son. He was still studying the floor. His silence was his confession. "Damon," he flinched at his name. "Look at me." Slowly his eyes lifted to mine. What I found in them was shame, guilt, and something darker than either. Weakness. "Your wife is crying," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so deep it frightened me. "These people whom I have never once invited into my home are drinking my liquor and carving up my house like it's theirs to divide. Tell them to get out. Tell them, Damon." Now. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment my son would stand up and show me the man I'd spent a lifetime raising him to be. Damon looked at me. He looked at Celeste. He looked at her wealthy, powerful parents, and then he broke. "Dad, just listen," he said, and his voice had that pleading, desperate edge. "Just stop making a scene. You're embarrassing me," embarrassing him. "They're right, Dad." The words spilled out fast, like he'd been holding them too long. "This house is too much for you. We can help. You're not getting any younger. We worry about you and Mom all the time. This is the best solution." "The best solution," I whispered? "To throw me out of my own bedroom?" "Dad, stop." He finally raised his voice, face flushed. "Just stop it. I am done with this. Done worrying about this old house, done worrying about your bills, done pretending we're not all just waiting. This is my house now. Or it will be. Celeste and I are the ones making the decisions here. Just accept it." And with that, the rage left me. It didn't ease out slowly. It vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, crystalline stillness behind my eyes. Everything came into sharp focus. I saw my son, not the boy I had raised, but a 38-year-old stranger, a man who had just confirmed every dark suspicion I'd been carrying. I saw Celeste beside him, wearing a smug little smile of triumph. I saw her parents regarding me with the detached pity of people watching something old and no longer useful. The son I had known was gone. "I see," I said. My voice didn't waver. I gave one slow nod. Then I turned my back on all of them. I walked out of the kitchen past Damon, who looked thrown off by the absence of shouting. I went back to the living room. Carolyn was still on the sofa watching me with eyes that were terrified and hopeful at the same time. "Walt, what's happening?" I didn't stop moving. I crossed to the coat closet. I took out her winter coat. I walked back to her and held it open. "Get your coat, Carolyn." "What?" She sniffled. "Walter, what are you doing?" "We're leaving," I said. My voice was level, the calm of a general who has taken in the whole battlefield and already knows exactly where to strike. Damon and the others had trailed me into the living room. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Damon asked, his voice caught between confusion and irritation. "Where are you going? You can't just leave." I got Carolyn to her feet and helped her arms into the sleeves of her coat. She looked up at me with 1,000 unspoken questions in her eyes, but she trusted me. She always had. I picked up her small purse from the table. I turned to face my son, his wife, and her parents. "You said you were taking over," I said. You said you were the ones in charge now." I was already moving toward the front door. "Then here you go," I said, swinging it open wide. "The place is yours." I steered Carolyn out onto the porch into the bite of the night air and let the door fall shut at my back. That lock clicking into place. I will never forget that sound. It was a chapter ending and something else, something harder and colder, snapping into place. No taxi. I pulled up the black car service I keep saved on my phone. A dark, spotless Cadillac Escalade rolled to a stop at the curb in under 2 minutes. Carolyn was trembling beside me. Cold shock, probably both. She looked at that vehicle, then searched my face, utterly lost. "Walter, what is this? Where on earth are we going?" "Somewhere they can't follow us, Carolyn. Come on." The driver stepped around and held her door. I told him our destination. The Four Seasons downtown. Not a word from Carolyn the whole drive. She kept her face turned to the glass, and in her reflection, I could make out the dried tracks the tears had left on her cheeks. When the Escalade glided under the bright canopy of the hotel entrance, I felt her go rigid beside me. "Walt," she breathed, barely above a whisper. "A room here has to run $500 a night at least. We can't afford something like this." Don't worry about it, honey, I said, and took her hand. I walked us straight to the front desk. The night manager's rehearsed smile shifted into something genuine the moment his eyes landed on me. Mr. Drummond, welcome back, sir. We had no reservation on file for you tonight. Last-minute call, Theodore, I said. I'll need the presidential suite right now. Absolutely, sir. If you'll follow me, someone will bring your luggage up shortly. Carolyn's grip on my arm tightened, her fingers pressing hard through my coat. Walter, Mr. Drummond, the presidential suite. I gave her hand a firm squeeze. Upstairs first. I'll tell you everything, I promise. The suite stopped you in your tracks. More square footage than the whole ground floor of our home. The windows ran floor to ceiling on every side, and the city burned beneath us like scattered embers across a dark plain. Carolyn drifted into the middle of the room and stood there motionless. She reached out and ran her fingers along a marble side table, testing whether any of it was real. Walter, she said, and her voice had gone unsteady. I'm frightened. What is all this? How does this place know who you are? I draped my coat over the nearest chair and sat her down on a velvet sofa that probably ran more than our old car was worth. Carolyn, I need a few minutes and I need you to hear me out. But first a call. The most consequential call I've made in years. I took out my phone. My hands didn't tremble at all. Whatever fire had been raging in me back at the house had burned itself out, and what remained was something steady and cold as iron. I dialed a number I had memorized long ago, one I hadn't used in nearly a year. 2 rings, then a voice from New York. Everett Crane speaking. Everett. Walter Drummond. A sharp breath on the other end. Walter? Do you have any idea what time it is over here? It's 3 o'clock in the morning. This has to be, is it? It's time, Everett, I said. The silence that followed was long and deliberate. You're absolutely sure about this? His tone had gone professional, stripped of everything personal. You understand the weight of what you're asking. Clause 7B is the nuclear button. Once it's triggered, there's no walking it back. It means Damon will be. I'm sure, I said. My voice didn't waver. His wife and her family just stood in my kitchen and told my wife and me to pack our things and go live in the basement. He chose his side. Cut him off. I want it done before sunrise. You have my word, Everett said, but I need you and Carolyn in my office first thing. 9 o'clock. My team will have everything set. We'll be there, I said, ended the call and set the phone down. Carolyn was watching me from across the room. Eyes wide, caught somewhere between frightened and bewildered. Clause 7B. Cut who off, Walt, you're scaring me. Who is Everett Crane? I pulled a chair over and sat facing her. 40 years. I had carried this for 40 years, telling myself I was shielding her from it. Sitting there in that hotel suite, I finally understood that what I'd actually done was leave her exposed. She deserved the truth. She had deserved it for a long time. Everett Crane, I said, is my attorney. Not the man who does our taxes. My actual attorney. He manages my estate. Your estate, Carolyn, I said. Holding both her hands, they were ice cold. There are things I've kept from you and from Damon for a very, very long time. I need to say them now, and I did. I laid it all out. The architectural firm, what really happened when I walked away from it at 55. I didn't simply retire. I sold the firm. Specifically, I sold my portfolio of structural design patents to an international conglomerate. What I walked away with wasn't just enough to get by. I said it plainly, the old deception finally out in the open. It was a great deal more than that. Far more than I had any use for. How much, Walt? She asked, her voice barely a breath. The sale itself came to $24 million. After the government took its share, I moved 20 million into a blind trust. The Drummond Family Trust, I named it. Carolyn made a small, strangled sound. $20 million. That number is older than it sounds, honey. Everett has been growing it ever since. We're sitting closer to 35 million today. She yanked her hands back. Why, the word came out like a wound. Not excitement. Not gratitude. Why would you do that to us all, the scrimping the old car watching every dollar, Damon? Why, because of Damon, I said, and the full weight of it pressed down on me for the first time. I had watched what inherited wealth did to my business partner's children. It hollowed them out. It handed everything to them before they'd earned the right to want it. I refused to let that happen to my son. I needed him to struggle a little, to build something with his own hands, to understand what a dollar actually costs. I wanted him to become a man on his own terms, not a kept heir. So you pretended to be broke. I lived within a modest life, I said, correcting her as gently as I could. Everything he genuinely needed, he got. College, the trust covered it. The deposit on his first apartment, that was the trust too. I told him both times it was the last of my savings. And I truly believed I was building his character. I pushed back from the chair and went to stand at the window the city laid out below me in the dark. I was wrong about all of it. It wasn't character I was building. I was simply making sure nobody could see the target on my back. I convinced him I was fragile. I convinced him I was ordinary. I convinced him I was a weight around his neck. And he took me at my word. Carolyn sat very still, somewhere deep inside herself, trying to hold together two pictures of the same man, the one she'd been married to, and the one sitting across from her now. So the house, she said at last, and her voice had gone small and far away. The house they had the tape measure out for. The house they think they're inheriting. I turned around. Here's the part that matters most, Carolyn. That house was never ours to begin with. What are you saying? I'm saying I told her, feeling something sharp and clean rise in my chest, that it belongs to the trust. We've lived in it all these years as tenants, beneficiaries, and Damon, without knowing it, just tried to throw the landlord out. The following morning, Carolyn and I made our way to Everett Crane's offices. Carolyn had on the same clothes she'd worn the night before, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. I had phoned the hotel concierge at 6 a.m. and arranged to have a new $2,200 midnight navy suit brought up to the room. When I stepped out of the bedroom, Carolyn's hand went to her mouth. In 45 years, she had never seen me dressed like that. Nothing that didn't come off a department store rack. Something in her face shifted, like she was finally meeting a version of me she hadn't known existed. Everett's operation bore no resemblance to some cramped neighborhood law office. He occupied the entire 45th floor of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower, sweeping views, dark walnut paneling, museum-quality art on every wall. The receptionist didn't ask our names. She rose the moment we walked in. "Mr. Drummond, Mr. Crane is ready for you in the main conference room." Carolyn pressed close to my side. This was a world she had spent 40 years not knowing I moved through. The conference room held a mahogany table that ran a full 20 feet. Everett was at the far end, the skyline spread behind him like a backdrop. In that setting, in that pinstriped suit, he wasn't the reassuring voice I rang at 3 a.m. He was someone who commanded rooms. "Good morning, Walter Carolyn," he said, waving us toward the chairs. "I'm sorry it had to be like this, but I'm relieved you're here. There's a lot on the table and the clock is already running." "Everett talked to me," Carolyn said, leaning forward. "Walter filled me in on the trust. But what made Damon go that far? It can't just be about the house." "That's exactly right, Carolyn." "It isn't," Everett said, and his expression darkened. He pushed a thick, spiral-bound report across the table in my direction. The moment Walter raised the possibility of invoking Clause 7B, I put my investigators on it. What unfolded at your home last night had nothing to do with disrespect alone. It was desperation, plain and undisguised. I cracked the report open. The first page summarized my son's financial position. I felt the color leave my face. "My God," I whispered. "What is it?" Walter Carolyn asked, craning toward me. I couldn't find the words. I turned the report around so she could see the figure at the bottom of the page. What is $750,000, she asked. That Everett said is the total debt your son Damon and his wife Celeste are currently carrying. But that can't be right, Carolyn said. Damon has a real career. He's a marketing director. He earns good money. He told us he makes $150,000 a year, Everett cut in, which is a solid income. The problem is Celeste spends $300,000 a year. He clicked a remote. The wall screen came to life, spreadsheets, credit card statements. Neiman Marcus Saks, Fifth Avenue, a lease payment for a new Porsche Cayenne, that Celeste was driving mortgage payments on a condo that was way beyond their reach. They've been living a complete fiction. Carolyn, I said, everything suddenly locking into place. A suffocating, all-consuming fiction. But the Hartwells, Carolyn said, Celeste's parents, they have money. They must be helping. That's the cruelest part of it, Everett said, advancing to the next slide. The Hartwells are wealthy, yes, but they are tight with their own money. They care enormously about appearances, but handouts are another matter entirely. They expect Damon as the husband to sustain that lifestyle on his own, and Damon trying to meet that standard has been drowning for years. Personal loans, maxed out cards, 22 of them. He is, to say it plainly, on the verge of losing everything. I stared at the figures, the ski trips to Vail, the jewelry receipts. This is why they had a tape measure in my kitchen. They need the equity in this house, I said. They need it now. It goes deeper than that, Walter Everett said, and his voice dropped a register. The room seemed to cool. What happened at your home last night? That was not their first move. That was the fallback. Their original plan had already failed. Their original plan, Carolyn whispered. Everett looked at me. Walter, I held this back until it became necessary. 3 months ago, I received a call from the senior manager at the bank that administers the Drummond Trust. He brought up a document on screen, a scanned copy of an email. 3 months ago, Damon Drummond and his father-in-law, Gerald Hartwell, arranged a private meeting at the bank. They arrived with their own attorney. Their purpose was to petition the bank to freeze control over the trust's assets. I was out of my chair before he finished the sentence. They did what they moved to have you, Walter, declared legally, mentally incompetent. Carolyn's hand flew to her mouth. They put together a file. Everett went on a dossier of so-called evidence. How you forget things. How you live below your means, which they framed as a sign of senile hoarding. How you decline to manage your own finances, letting them drift. But we chose to live simply, Carolyn said. That was never a problem, it was a decision. And they tried to turn that decision into a weapon, Everett said. Their argument was that Walter's refusal to live extravagantly was itself proof of mental deterioration. They wanted the bank to hand Damon emergency signatory authority over the trust framed as protecting his father's interests. They were after the $35 million, I said, the cold spreading through me. Every dollar of it, Everett confirmed, and the bank naturally showed them the door. The trust is built to be impenetrable to stop exactly this kind of move. The bank manager knows you personally, Walter. He recognized it as a fraudulent claim immediately, and he followed the trust's security protocol and phoned me the same day. I settled back into my chair, the full weight of what I was hearing pressing down on me. This was never just a greedy son angling for a bigger house. This was methodical, premeditated, a conspiracy laid out step by step. My own son had tried to have me legally erased, to have my mind declared void so he could strip me of everything I'd built. So yesterday, Carolyn said quietly, working through it, yesterday was the backup plan. I finished the thought for her. When they couldn't crack the trust, they went after the one thing they believed I actually owned outright. They couldn't reach the millions, so they settled for the $500,000 they figured the house was worth. They weren't just pushing us to the basement, Walter Carolyn said, and her voice had gone to steel. They were pushing us out of our own lives one way or another. I looked over at Everett. So Damon triggered Clause 7B himself. Everett Crane allowed himself a slow smile. He triggered it the day he walked into that bank 3 months ago. Damon is already disinherited, Walter. He simply hasn't been told yet. Carolyn's hands had started shaking, but not from fear. It was fury. The cold, concentrated kind I had never seen in her before. They tried to have you declared incompetent, she said, her voice low and precise. They tried to take your mind away from you. They tried, I said. And they failed. So they came for the house instead. Those vultures, she said through her teeth. Walter, what does this mean now? What comes next? I looked at Everett. Tell her. Tell her exactly what Damon just brought down on himself. Everett folded his hands and turned to Carolyn with calm, measured composure. Carolyn, when Walter and I structured this trust, he foresaw this very scenario. He worried that Damon, if he ended up around the wrong people, might start seeing his father as a source of money, rather than a man to be respected. So Walter asked me to draft a very specific, very severe clause into the trust. Clause 7B. What does it actually do? Carolyn asked. We gave it a name among ourselves, Everett said. We call it the wolf in sheep's clothing clause. It provides that, if any primary beneficiary, in this case Damon Drummond, is found to have committed any act of willful financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founders Walter and Carolyn Drummond, that beneficiary is immediately and permanently removed from the trust. Carolyn's eyes went wide. Permanently. Completely and irrevocably, Everett said, as though his name had never appeared in the document at all. The attempt to have Walter declared mentally incompetent, an act of calculated financial and emotional harm, triggered this clause 3 months ago. And yesterday he added their hostile move to seize your home and exile you to the basement was the final undeniable confirmation. As of right now, Damon Drummond holds no legal claim to a single dollar of the $35 million Drummond Family Trust. The words settled over the room. $35 million. Gone. Carolyn sat with it for a moment. So what happens to the money? The house, where does all of it go? It goes, Everett said to the contingent beneficiary, the person Walt designated to receive everything in the event of Damon's disqualification. I felt a smile move across my face. Nadine. Nadine, Carolyn said, startled. Your sister's girl. My sister's daughter, I said. The one who works as a public school nurse in Memphis. The one who calls us without fail every single Sunday just to hear our voices. The one who still sends you a handmade card on your birthday, Carolyn. Everett nodded. I reached Nadine this morning and laid out the situation. She was stunned, as you'd expect, but she understands what this means. She's on a flight tonight. Effective immediately, your niece is the legal heir to the entire estate, including the property at 417 Cypress Mill Road. A long silence settled as we let the enormity of that sink in. Then something cold and deliberate moved across my face. He has no idea, I said quietly. None, Everett confirmed. As far as Damon is concerned, he's been outsmarting a worn-out old man sitting on a house he can take. They want that house? I said, the shape of something forming in my mind. They are so desperate for that $500,000 they're prepared to tear our lives apart to get it. So I said, looking at Everett, let's give it to them. Carolyn stared at me. Walter, what are you saying? The trap, Carolyn? They laid their trap. Now we build ours. Everett caught it immediately. His eyes sharpened with recognition. Oh, that is brilliant, Walt. Diabolical and completely legal. Will someone tell me what's being planned? Carolyn said, somewhere between unnerved and intrigued. Everett leaned in. Your family, Carolyn, believes Walter is feeble, confused, and beaten. They think they've already won. They think Walter ran last night because he had nowhere to go. They are arrogant. They are greedy. And they are not nearly as clever as they think they are. We are going to use every bit of that arrogance against them. We will draw up a new document, a transfer of property and care agreement. It will look entirely official, I said. It will appear to show that we, Walter and Carolyn Drummond, in our diminished condition, are voluntarily surrendering the deed to the house. And in exchange, Everett continued, Damon and Celeste assume full legal responsibility for our ongoing care. They won't be able to grab a pen fast enough. But buried in the language, Carolyn, that's where the real work is. What will it say? It will say, Everett said, with quiet satisfaction, that Damon and Celeste Drummond, together with their witnesses, Gerald and Vivian Hartwell, do hereby acknowledge and confirm that Walter and Carolyn Drummond are in a vulnerable state, suffering from diminished capacity, and are no longer able to make sound financial and personal decisions on their own behalf, and that they are willingly and knowingly assuming control of all assets on that basis. It won't be a transfer at all. It will be a confession. A signed, witnessed, notarized confession of conspiracy and elder abuse. My heart was hammering, not out of fear, but out of a cold, righteous fury that had settled deep in my bones. It's perfect, I said. They'll be so fixated on what they think they're getting that they'll sign their own destruction. Let's do it, Carolyn said, her voice steady and certain. I picked up my phone. My hand didn't waver. I dialed Damon's number. He picked up on the first ring. He must have been clutching that phone, waiting and panicking. Dad. Dad, where are you? Is Mom all right? We've been worried sick. His voice was a flawless imitation of a devoted son. It turned my stomach. I let out a long, weary exhale and let my voice go thin and unsteady. Damon. Son. Dad. What's wrong? Your mother and I have been at a lawyer's office, I said, leaning into the role of a broken, defeated old man. We've been at this all night. And son, maybe you were right. I heard the breath catch on his end. A beat of silence. What do you mean, Dad? He asked carefully, not quite willing to let himself believe it. We're getting old, I said, letting my voice break a little. Carolyn is a wreck. I can't keep fighting this. You said you'd look after us. You said you'd take care of everything. The house, it's too much for me anymore. Oh, Dad, he breathed. The sheer relief soaking through that phrase was repulsive. Yes, of course we'll handle everything. You're making the right call. I promise you. Good, I said. Then I need you to come down to the lawyer's office. Everett Crane, J.P. Morgan Chase Tower. I want to make this official, sign the house over to you properly. Let's just put this to rest. There was a pause on his end. I could almost feel the greed swamping whatever thin thread of caution remained. You mean it, he whispered. You'll actually sign it over today? Yes, I said. 2 p.m. Bring Celeste and bring her parents. Since they seem to be at the center of all this, I want them present as witnesses. Make it legal and proper. Yes, Yes, Dad. We'll be there. His voice had gone bright, almost triumphant. 2 p.m. sharp. You don't have a thing to worry about, Dad. We'll take care of everything from here on out. I'm sure you will, son, I said. I'm sure you will. I set the phone down. I looked at Carolyn, pale but unshaken. I looked at Everett, who was already dictating terms to his assistant. He took the bait, I said. Everett smiled. The trap is set. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. My son Damon and his wife Celeste came in first, with Gerald and Vivian Hartwell tight behind them. These were not the same people from the night before. They had gone home cleaned up and dressed for what they clearly believed was their day of triumph. Damon had on his most expensive-looking suit, a charcoal pinstripe suit I would have bet anything was financed on credit. Celeste was in a bright cream pantsuit, carrying herself like an executive about to close the deal of the century. Vivian Hartwell was layered in gold jewelry, her smile sharp and hunting. Gerald just looked smug, as though he personally had engineered this entire outcome. Dad, Damon said, crossing the room and laying a hand on my shoulder. It landed heavy, possessive. I'm glad you're being sensible about this. It really is the best thing for everyone. Celeste glided over to Carolyn. Mother Carolyn, she said, her voice coated in artificial warmth. You look exhausted, poor thing. But don't you give it another thought. We're taking the wheel from here. You won't have to worry about a single thing. You won't regret this, I promise. Let's get on with it. Gerald Hartwell announced, dragging out a chair at the head of the table as if the room already belonged to him. We've got dinner reservations at 7. Everett Crane, every inch the professional, gestured for them to take their seats. I appreciate everyone making time on short notice. As Mr. Drummond conveyed to his son, he and Mrs. Drummond spent the night in serious discussion and have arrived at a significant decision. He pushed 4 thick, formally bound documents across the polished mahogany table. This, Everett said, is the care and property transfer agreement, a thorough document. Celeste's eyes were practically fused to the cover sheet. She was barely containing herself. Allow me to walk you through the central points. Everett continued, his voice a measured legal cadence. The agreement stipulates that Mr. and Mrs. Walter Drummond, the founders, agree to transfer the full deed and title of the property at 417 Cypress Mill Road to Mr. and Mrs. Damon Drummond. Celeste exhaled sharply, a small, satisfied release of tension. In exchange, Everett went on, Mr. and Mrs. Damon Drummond agree to provide comprehensive lifetime care for the founders, including but not limited to housing, medical oversight, and complete financial management. Yes, absolutely, we agree to all of it, Celeste said, already reaching for the pen at the center of the table. 100%. Show me where to sign. Everett raised a hand. One moment, Mrs. Drummond. We proceed properly here. There are several signature pages to address. He turned toward Gerald and Vivian. And since you, Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, were present during the family discussion last night and have come here today, we would ask that you serve as official witnesses to this agreement. Witnesses, of course, Gerald said, puffing himself up. Very good, Everett said. Your signatures will appear on page 8. It's a standard witness attestation confirming your presence, your understanding of the agreement, and your ability to attest to the founders' state of mind. Their state of mind, Vivian asked, her smile going slightly rigid. Correct, Everett said, turning pages with easy calm. Right here, by signing, you are confirming that you have personally observed and concur that Walter and Carolyn Drummond are now in a condition requiring dedicated care and supervision, and that they are entering this agreement based on their acknowledged inability to manage their own affairs. Gerald and Vivian exchanged a quick, satisfied look. They thought this was masterful. They thought it formally cemented the case they'd been making that we were senile, incompetent past it. Of course, Gerald said, giving a decisive nod. We're glad to attest to that. We've been making that argument for months. Everything we've seen confirms it. Wonderful, Everett said. Then let's proceed. He placed the first copy in front of Celeste. She didn't bother to open it. She went straight to the back and signed with a sweeping flourish. Damon signed next, his hand. Less steady, more hurried, but just as quick. They didn't read a single clause. They didn't read the language confirming their acknowledgement of our diminished capacity. They didn't read the fine print about willingly assuming control of our affairs. They just signed. Then Everett handed the remaining 2 copies to Gerald and Vivian. They also went straight to page 8 and added their signatures with pride, legally swearing to our incompetence. Finally, Everett slid the last copy across to Carolyn and me. I looked at her. Her hand was perfectly steady. She lifted the pen and signed her name. Then I signed mine. Everett gathered all 4 copies and squared them neatly into a stack. Well, he said, setting them down on the table, that appears to cover it. Celeste rose from her chair, face radiant. She brought her hands together in a single sharp clap. Wonderful. Damon, we need to get the contractors on the phone. They can start on the master bedroom first thing tomorrow. She pivoted toward us. Dad, Mom, we'll help you move your things down to the basement once we're back tonight. It'll actually be quite cozy down there for you. Damon looked like a man who'd just had $750,000 lifted off his chest. I let the moment breathe. I watched them soak in their victory, the greed, the relief, the spectacular arrogance of people who believe they've already won. I gave it a full 10 seconds. Then I glanced at Everett. He gave me the nod. Actually, I said, my voice coming out clear and unhurried, cutting right through Celeste's chatter. We're not quite finished. Celeste's smile flickered. What do you mean we signed everything? You did, I agreed. But there is one small technical problem with the document you just signed. A minor detail. Gerald Hartwell's eyes narrowed. What detail? I leaned forward in my chair. The house. I don't actually own it. Celeste's victorious glow was the picture of unchecked greed. Gerald Hartwell looked self-satisfied, convinced he had just secured his daughter's future by neatly disposing of her inconvenient in-laws. Actually, Mrs. Drummond, we are not quite done, Everett said. His tone had shifted entirely. The congenial, accommodating manner had been set aside. What remained was sharp and cold, the voice of an attorney who was no longer facilitating anything but delivering a verdict. Celeste, who had already angled toward the door, went still. What are you talking about? The papers are signed. It's done. Everett said, there is a small technical problem with the care and property transfer agreement you just signed. Gerald let out a slow, patronizing sigh. What problem? It's a standard document. I was a lawyer myself, Crane. I know how these things work. Do you? Everett asked, letting the question sit there. Yes, Gerald said, waving it off. We pulled the county records before we even walked in today. The property at 417 Cypress Mill Road is registered to Walter Drummond. He just signed his rights over. It's done. Time to go. Everett Crane smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man watching prey walk straight into a snare he had set months ago. That is precisely where you have it wrong, Mr. Hartwell. You pulled the public records, but you could not pull the trust records. So you see, Mr. Drummond's name does appear on that deed, but only in his capacity as trust manager. The atmosphere in the room shifted like a charge before lightning. Damon, who had looked visibly relieved a moment before, now looked lost. What? What trust? What are you even talking about? The true legal and indisputable owner of that property, Everett went on, and has been for the past 20 years, is the Drummond Family Trust. The what? Celeste's voice jumped an octave into a near squeal. The Drummond Family Trust, I said, speaking up for the first time since they had all walked through the door. My trust. The one I created in 2004, right after I sold my company. Damon turned to look at me, his expression a complete blank. You have a trust. What does that even mean, like a small retirement account? No, son, I said, leaning in. Not like a small account. Like all the accounts. Vivian Hartwell let out a short, ugly laugh. A trust. Please. You live in that modest little house. You drive that 10-year-old Buick. You're a retired architect. What on earth could you have sitting in a trust? A few $1,000s. This is a pathetic waste of everyone's time. I looked at Vivian. I let her arrogance, her sweeping, total misjudgment hang right there in the air between us. I let her feel superior for one final glorious second. Everett, I said, my voice even, what is the current valuation of the Drummond Family Trust? Everett reached for a different folder, a thick one they hadn't laid eyes on before. As of this morning's market open, Mr. Drummond, the Trust's liquid and fixed assets are valued at $35,421,000 and change. The silence that came after was so complete, I could make out the faint hum of the air conditioning unit overhead. I heard Carolyn draw a shaky breath beside me. She already knew, but hearing that figure spoken aloud in this room still landed like a blow. Damon just stared. His mouth opened, then closed. Not a sound. Gerald Hartwell's smug, fleshy expression collapsed. He looked as though he'd been physically slapped. 30 million. But the most beautiful reaction, the one I will carry with me, was Celeste's. Her face cycled through emotions so fast it was almost hard to track. First bewilderment, then flat disbelief, and then a wild, all-consuming, ecstatic joy. Her eyes came alive like floodlights. 35 million. She breathed, turning to Damon, her voice trembling. Baby, we're rich. She actually began to laugh, a high, frantic sound that was half sob. He has $35 million. Oh my God, Damon, we're rich. She threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck even as he stood there paralyzed. We're rich. We don't need that stupid house. Who cares about the house? We get the trust. She tore herself away from him and wheeled toward me, her entire manner transformed in an instant. The performance of honey was gone, replaced by a frantic, clawing adoration. Dad. Oh, Dad, I mean Walter. I always knew it. I always told Damon, your father is such a dignified man, so wise, so... Stop. My voice was cold. It cut clean through her hysterical rambling and dropped her mid-sentence. What? She asked, her smile beginning to slip. You're not rich, I said. He's not rich. You get nothing. She froze, solid. What do you mean, Damon? He's your father. You're the beneficiary. You were, I said. But the agreement. Celeste stammered, stabbing a finger toward the documents spread across the table. We signed. We have a deal. Yes, Everett Crane said, lifting the stack of papers they had signed so eagerly. He held them up. The care and property transfer agreement. Thank you for this. It is an extraordinarily valuable document. Celeste glanced at her father with a flicker of relief. See, it's valuable. See, it is. Everett agreed. But not as a property transfer. As I have already explained, that portion is entirely void. Walter doesn't own the house he was attempting to sign over to you. He paused. No, this document is valuable as a confession. Gerald Hartwell's color drained from pale to a sickly, waxy gray. He understood now. A confession, Damon whispered. Yes, I said, looking directly at my son. You, your wife, and your in-laws have just signed a legally binding document witnessed and attested, declaring that you believe I am mentally incompetent, that you believe I am suffering from diminished capacity, and that you are conspiring to seize control of my assets based on that belief. You have just handed me every piece of proof I will ever need to walk into a courtroom. Damon stared at the papers, then at me, then at Everett. The color kept leaving his face until what replaced it was a dark, ugly flush of fury. So what? He suddenly exploded, slamming his open palm flat against the mahogany table. The crack of it made Celeste flinch and Carolyn go rigid. So what? It's a piece of paper. It's a trick. It doesn't mean anything. His eyes swung to me, his voice climbing higher, cracking with panic. You can't do this. I am your son. I am your only son. I am the beneficiary. That trust, that $35 million, it's mine. You can't just strip it away. You can't. Right, Gerald, tell them. He was looking at me, but he was pleading to his wife, to his in-laws, trying to prop them up. Trying to prop himself up. It's my birthright. You were the beneficiary, Damon, I said. My voice stayed quiet. The stillness in it seemed to frighten him far more than any raised voice could. You were the beneficiary right up until 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, August 12th, 3 months ago. Damon went rigid. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I asked. August 12th, a meeting at First Lone Star Trust Bank. You, your father-in-law, Gerald, and a lawyer from his firm. Does any of that ring a bell? Damon's face went slack, like the bones underneath had given way. How did you know about that? The bank said it was a confidential inquiry. Yeah, they called me. Everett Crane said, his voice like a blade. The moment you walked out of that building, as administrator of the Drummond Trust, I am legally obligated to investigate any hostile inquiries or attempts to seize control of its assets. Hostile. Damon grabbed for the word like a lifeline. I was just asking questions. I was worried about him, about his condition. You were not asking questions, Damon. I stood up. I felt the full weight of myself. I felt tall. I felt powerful. You were making accusations. You told the board members that I was senile. You told them I was hoarding. You held up my quiet, private way of living as proof of advanced mental decay, a danger to myself and to the estate. You brought a lawyer, and you petitioned the board to have me declared mentally incompetent and to hand you emergency signatory authority over all $35 million. That, Everett said, was a profound tactical error. Because that single act of deliberate, willful betrayal triggered Clause 7B. Clause 7B. Celeste whispered, the color gone from her face. What is Clause 7B? And the T, I said, is the part of the trust I prayed to God I would never have cause to use. I came around the table until I was standing directly in front of my son. He was trembling. When I built this trust, I knew your heart, Damon. I knew it was good. But I also knew your weakness. I knew how easily you could be swayed. I knew how badly you needed the approval of people like them. I gestured toward the Hartwells. People who only measure worth by price tags. So I had Everett engineer a defense mechanism into the very foundation of the trust. A failsafe, a poison pill. We call it the wolf in sheep's clothing clause. Carolyn, who had not spoken a single word since they arrived, spoke now. Her voice was ice. Explain it. And it states, I said, looking straight into Damon's terrified eyes, in plain, ironclad legal language that if the primary beneficiary, Damon Drummond, or any person acting in concert with him, including his wife or his in-laws, is found to have committed willful financial, emotional, or physical harm against me or your mother, that beneficiary is immediately, automatically, and permanently disinherited. As though his name had never appeared in the document at all. Permanent, Carolyn said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. But the moment you sat down in that bank and tried to have me erased from my own life, Damon, I said, you erased yourself from my legacy. You get nothing. Not the house, not the savings, not a single cent of the trust, not now, not ever. The words settled over the room like ash after a fire. Gerald Hartwell was the first to move. Sputtering his legal mind, clawing for any crack in the wall. This is outrageous. It's coercion. It's a contract of adhesion. It will never survive a courtroom challenge. We will fight this. Everett Crane actually chuckled, a cold, dry sound with no warmth in it anywhere. Fight it with what, Mr. Hartwell, it has already survived. This trust was stress-tested against this precise challenge by 2 federal courts at the time it was drafted. It is ironclad. Your client disqualified himself 3 months ago with his own hands. Everett held the stack of papers they had just signed up for the room to see. And to make it worse, every one of you just signed a fully notarized confession admitting to the very acts that disqualify him. The game is finished. You lost. And that was the moment Celeste understood. The house was nothing. The $35 million, the fantasy, the entire foundation her marriage had been built on, all of it was gone. It had never belonged to her. She turned to Damon, and the look on her face was pure, cold, reptilian hatred. "You idiot," she hissed. "You failed." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went down, sliding without any dignity out of her expensive chair and crumpling onto the Persian rug in a dead faint. Celeste was still on the floor, propped on one elbow, her bright cream pantsuit smudged with dust from the rug. Gerald and Vivian Hartwell sat frozen in their chairs, faces a sickly shade of gray, like wax figures in a museum dedicated to their own arrogance. Damon, my son, was the only one with any movement in him. He was shaking his head back and forth over and over as though he could physically refuse what he had just heard. He paid no attention to his wife on the floor. He paid no attention to his stunned in-laws. He just looked at me, eyes wide, his panic raw and childlike. "No," he whispered. "No. If not me, then who?" His voice broke apart. Who gets it? Who gets the house? Who gets everything? It doesn't just disappear, does it? He swept his eyes around the room as if the $35 million were a physical object, a trophy he had been promised, and he was terrified to find it had simply vanished. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I turned my head and nodded to Everett. "Everett, I believe our other guest has been waiting. Would you bring her in?" Everett reached over and pressed a small button on the conference room intercom. "You can come in now, Nadine." The side door, the one connecting to Everett's private office, swung open. A young woman stepped through. She was around 30, dressed in simple green nurse's scrubs, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her face was kind, but it carried a deep, settled sadness. It was my niece Nadine, my sister's daughter. Damon's head whipped toward her, and whatever confusion was there curdled instantly into a new white-hot rage. "Nadine, what the hell are you doing here? This is a private family matter. Get out." On the floor, Celeste had managed to push herself upright. Her hair had come loose, and her makeup was beginning to track down her face. She spotted Nadine, and her expression twisted with contempt. The nurse. "What is she doing here? Is she here to check our blood pressure? Get her out." Nadine stopped a few feet short of the table. She looked at Damon, not with anger, but with a deep, steady pity. "Hello, Damon. I'm here because Uncle Walter and Aunt Carolyn asked me to be." "She is here." Everett Crane said, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension. As the contingent beneficiary of the Drummond family trust, Damon just stared. The what?" "As of 9 a.m. this morning," Everett continued, "upon your legal and permanent disqualification under Clause 7B, the designation of primary beneficiary was dissolved. Per the trust's bylaws, all assets, rights, and titles transfer immediately to the contingent beneficiary, in this case, Ms. Nadine Weston." Everett looked over at Nadine and gave a single nod. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, Nadine is the sole heir to the entire $35 million estate." The silence was absolute. Celeste, still on the floor, made a small choking sound. Gerald Hartwell looked like a man in the first seconds of a heart attack. Damon shook his head, and a wild, broken laugh escaped him. "But you're giving it all to her, a part-time nurse from Memphis. This is a joke. This is the sickest joke I have ever heard." "It is not a joke, Damon," Nadine said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled every corner of the room. She stepped forward and set a single, crisp legal document on the table directly in front of him. It landed with a soft, final thud. "What is this?" Damon whispered, not quite willing to touch it. As the new legal administrator of the trust, Nadine said, "which, as you now know, is the sole owner of the property at 417 Cypress Mill Road, this is a formal legal notice of eviction." Celeste scrambled to her feet, her cream pantsuit now rumpled and ruined. "Eviction you can't evict us. That's our house. She knows Celeste," Nadine said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "It is my house now. Or rather, it belongs to the trust which I manage on behalf of my aunt and uncle. You and Damon were living there as guests. Last night you attempted to evict the rightful owners and push them down to the basement. You are no longer guests." She tapped the paper. "This notice gives you and your husband, Damon Drummond, exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. 24 hours. Damon exploded, his voice finally breaking loose. "That's insane. We have things there. Our furniture. Our lives are in that house. You have 24 hours to remove your personal, movable belongings." Nadine said, her voice like steel. "Anything remaining in the house after 2 p.m. tomorrow, including your wife's renovation plans for her Carrara Marble Island and your father-in-law's tape measure, will be considered abandoned property. It will be liquidated immediately, and the proceeds donated to a charity for the elderly. The locks on every door will be changed at 2:01 p.m. tomorrow." "You bitch!" Celeste shrieked, and she actually lunged across the table. "I would not do that, Mrs. Drummond," Everett said, with perfect calm, stepping squarely into her path, without a flicker of alarm. "You are already facing potential criminal charges for conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Adding assault to that list would be, and I am using the precise legal term, exceptionally stupid." Celeste stopped. Her hand stayed raised, her face a mask of ugly, impotent fury. "As of this moment," Nadine said, "you are all trespassing in this office. And if any of you set foot on the property at 417 Cypress Mill Road again without my or my aunt and uncle's express written permission, I will have you arrested." Damon ignored her. He ignored everyone. He pushed past Everett, stumbled around the table, and came to stand directly in front of me. His face was wrecked, tears, sweat, desperation, all running together. He choked out, jabbing a finger toward Nadine. "Over me, her. Why, Dad, I am your son. I'm your blood. She's just your sister's kid." I looked at my son. My chest was heavy, not with anger anymore, but with a vast, hollow sadness. You're right, Damon, I said. You're my blood. But she... I turned and gestured to Nadine, who had moved to stand beside Carolyn and was holding her hand. She is my family. She's the one who calls Carolyn every Sunday just to talk. She's the one who remembers my birthday, not with a text, but with a handwritten card. She's the one who, when Carolyn had her knee surgery 2 years ago, flew in on her own dime and sat beside that hospital bed for 3 days sleeping in a chair, without asking for a single thing in return. You are my son, Damon. But she is my family. I held his gaze. You are just a disappointment. Gerald Hartwell. His face, a dark, mottled purple, finally accepted that it was over. He was a man who could not tolerate losing, and he had just been checkmated in front of his entire family. He seized Vivian by the arm and yanked her to her feet. Shh, this is preposterous, he sputtered, jerking his suit jacket back into place. A complete farce. We will not stand here and be insulted by this nurse and a senile old man who fancies himself a king. He's right, Vivian chimed in, frantically smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her expensive silk blouse. We are leaving. Damon, Celeste, get your things. We don't need any of this charity. We have our own money. We certainly don't need his $35 million. They moved toward the door, a pathetic bid to reclaim some dignity, to make it look as though they were walking away by choice rather than being driven out. Celeste, catching her parents' bluster, started to rally. She grabbed Damon's arm. Let's go, Damon. We'll fight this. We'll sue. We don't need them. Oh, but I'm afraid you do, Mr. Hartwell. Everett's voice, smooth as polished glass, brought them all to a stop. They turned hands, hovering just inches from the brass door handle. Excuse me, Gerald sneered. I said, Everett repeated. I'm afraid you do need them, or rather you needed his money. Please sit back down. We haven't finished the presentation. We have nothing further to discuss, Gerald growled. On the contrary, Everett replied, pressing a button on the small remote in his hand. The large projector screen recessed in the ceiling hummed to life and descended in silence. You all came here today under the pretense of caring for Walter and Carolyn. We are simply endeavoring to understand the full depth of that concern. The screen lit up, displaying a document in large, bold letters at the top, Liability Report, Drummond, Damon, and Celeste. Damon and Celeste went rigid. What is this? What you are about to hear is the moment everything that had been carefully hidden finally comes into the open, not just what others had done, but what it truly cost them to believe they could win. Before we get there, tell me this. If the people closest to you had been quietly working against you, would you have confronted them the moment you suspected or waited until the proof was airtight? You have no right! Damon demanded, his voice climbing with panic. That's private. Sure, it was private, Everett corrected him. Until you made it the trust's business by attempting to defraud it. As administrator, I carry a fiduciary duty to protect these assets from all credible threats. And you, Mr. Drummond, along with your accomplices, have become the most significant threat of all. He aimed the red dot of a laser pointer at the screen. We were deeply curious about why you were so desperate. Why try to have your own father declared incompetent? Why risk everything for a house worth $500,000? The $35 million was the obvious prize, but the house, that was a smaller, more panicked move. It suggested a severe cash flow problem. Everett clicked the remote. A long list of credit card accounts filled the screen. American Express Platinum, Chase Sapphire Reserve, Visa Black. 22 accounts in total. Chatitum, you two, Everett said, directing his gaze squarely at Damon and Celeste, are living a spectacular lie. Your combined income before taxes runs approximately $150,000 per year. That is none of your business. Celeste snapped, her face draining of color. It is now, Everett said. Because your combined spending, according to these statements from the last 12 months, was just over $350,000, a deficit of $155,000. But of course it gets considerably worse. He clicked again. A new slide appeared: personal loans, payday advances, and applications for a second mortgage on their condo. Add it all together, Everett said, his voice filling the silent room. Your current unsecured high-interest debt totals $754,212.90. The voice that broke the silence was not Damon's. It was Celeste's. Satako. 700,000, she whispered, barely audible. She had turned to face her husband, her face bone-white, something sickening dawning behind her eyes. Damon couldn't meet her gaze. He was fixed on the screen, on the numbers that laid out his total ruin under the harsh conference room lights. You told me it was 200, she said, and then she shrieked, her voice fracturing. You told me it was one bad business loan. You lied to me. Damon finally looked at her, his face collapsing. I was going to fix it. I just needed one big win. You thought what? Celeste screamed, tears of pure rage cutting down her face. You thought you'd steal your father-in-law's house to cover your what even is this? Steal? This, Everett said helpfully, advancing to the next slide, is a detailed transaction history from 6 separate offshore online sports betting sites. It appears, Mr. Drummond, that the vast majority of this debt did not come from buying your wife expensive handbags. It came from gambling. You have wagered away nearly $500,000 you never had. Celeste looked physically ill. She stepped back from Damon as though he were something contagious. Gerald Hartwell, however, appeared almost relieved. He had spotted an opening. A gambler, he said, his voice coated in theatrical disgust. My God, Vivian, can you believe it? This con artist married our daughter. He played all of us. But he did, Vivian agreed, clutching at her pearls. He was going to drag our poor Celeste down with him. The liar. But that isn't entirely accurate, is it? Everett's voice dropped to something dangerously quiet. Gerald and Vivian went still. What do you mean? Gerald asked. Everett clicked the remote. The screen changed. In bold letters across the top it read, Hartwell, Gerald, and Vivian Financial Inquiry. What is this? Vivian stammered, her manufactured indignation evaporating on the spot. You have absolutely no right to our finances. Again, I do, Everett said. The moment you signed that document as witnesses to a fraudulent act, you made yourselves legal accomplices in this conspiracy. I needed to understand why a supposedly prosperous man like you, Gerald, would stake his entire reputation on such a flimsy, illegal scheme. Unless, of course, you were every bit as desperate as your son-in-law. New data filled the screen. Shaktita, it seems your boutique hedge fund, Mr. Hartwell, is not performing especially well. In fact, it has been under active SEC investigation for serious capital irregularities for the past 6 months. Gerald Hartwell stopped breathing. My investigators found that you have been borrowing heavily from your clients' trust accounts to cover your own catastrophic market losses, Everett said. You are not merely broke, Gerald. You are insolvent, and you are about to be indicted. You monster! Vivian shrieked, spinning on her husband. You told me the business was fine. You said you were a genius. And you, Gerald roared back, his face going purple. You told me your mother gave you that money. That's a lie. Oh, isn't it? Everett said, clicking one final time. And you, Vivian, that generous assistance you provided your daughter the money for the lease on the Porsche Cayenne that Celeste was driving, the down payment on the condo that did not come from your husband's thriving business. We traced the transactions. You have been systematically draining your own 88-year-old mother's retirement account without her knowledge, an account I might add that she kept at our bank. "You common thief!" Gerald howled at his wife. "You're one to talk, you fraud," she screamed back. And then it all came apart. The shouting, the accusations, the raw and ugly truth of all their lives detonating simultaneously in the middle of Everett's conference room. It was beautiful. Everett Crane let them implode for a full minute, a symphony of destruction. Then he cleared his throat. It seems, he said, switching off the screen, plunging the room back into heavy silence, that you were not a caring family rallying around an old man. You were a house of cards already mid-collapse, all of you trying to use Walt and Carolyn as the foundation to prop it up. The meeting is over. The silence that settled over the room held for a full 10 seconds. It was Celeste who broke it. She had not fainted this time. She had been calculating. She rose slowly, very slowly to her feet, face-pale eyes locked on my son. "You," she whispered. The sweetness was completely gone from her voice. What remained was a low reptilian hiss. "You lying worthless fraud." Damon, still staring at the blank screen where his $35 million had just ceased to exist, flinched. "What, Celeste? I didn't lie. I thought... You thought..." She shrieked, her voice vaulting into a register that made everyone wince. "You thought you told me your family was old money. You told me your father was just modest and eccentric. You told me this house was only the beginning. Q, I was trying to give you what you wanted." Damon yelled back, his desperation finally boiling over into anger. "I was trying to keep up. Who was the one who had to have the Porsche Cayenne, who needed the condo in the city, who dropped $10,000 on a single handbag last week? Because you told me we could afford it," she screamed, moving toward him, hands balled into fists. "I was trying to make it work. I was managing it." Managing it. Vivian Hartwell, having recovered some of herself, got to her feet. Her voice was pure venom. "You call $750,000 in gambling debts managing it. You are a degenerate, Damon. You married our daughter under false pretenses. You are a common con artist." "Oh, I'm the con artist!" Damon let out a laugh, high, broken, terrible. "Your husband is a crook. He's about to be indicted by the SEC, and you..." He jabbed a finger at Vivian. "You stole from your own 88-year-old mother. You are a pack of hypocrites, a family of vampires." Gerald Hartwell let out a roar and lunged across the table. "You ungrateful little, I'll kill you." "Gentlemen," Everett Crane's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the chaos like a blade. He stepped between Gerald and Damon. "That is enough." The room went silent again, the air between them vibrating with raw hatred. "This," Everett said, looking at all four of them with undisguised contempt, "is a place of business. It is my office. You will not reduce it to whatever this is. The meeting, as I have already stated, is over. The trust is secure. The documents are signed. I must insist you take your family grievances elsewhere." Immediately, Celeste was not looking at her parents. She was not looking at Everett. She was looking only at Damon, and I could see the final cold calculations clicking quietly into place behind her eyes. This was no longer anger alone. There was grief in it too. But she wasn't grieving the man. She was grieving the money. "No, so that's it." Damon whispered, his voice hollow. He could see it too. It was always just the money. Celeste, occupied with gathering her expensive purse, did not respond. "You never loved me," Damon said a little louder. "You loved this." He gestured around the opulent room. "You loved the idea of it. The $35 million. Celeste finally stopped. She turned to face him. Her expression was cold, composed, stripped down to bare bone. "Well," she said, her voice flat. He was rich, and you— a pause. You were too stupid to even inherit it correctly. You couldn't manage that one simple thing, could you? That was the bullet. I watched my son absorb it. I watched the last flicker of the weak, desperate boy who had tried so hard to give her everything just go out. He stood up straighter. He looked at her. Truly looked at her, maybe for the very first time. "You are a monster," he whispered. Celeste just laughed. A short, ugly, humorless bark. "No, Damon. Practical is what I am. And you proved to be a very, very bad investment." She pivoted toward her parents. "Let's get out of here. I need a drink and I need to get my lawyer on the phone." "Wait," Damon's voice caught her. She turned, irritation carved into every feature. "What is it now, planning to beg, save your breath?" Damon raised his left hand, slow, deliberate. "You're forgetting something." He worked the simple gold wedding band from his finger. My own father's ring. The one I had pressed into his palm the morning he announced he was getting married. He held it a moment, studying it, then let it drop onto the polished floor. It spun and skated across the mahogany until it came to a stop right against the toe of her designer heels. "I'm divorcing you," he said. Celeste stared down at the ring lying at her feet. She raised her eyes to his. Out came that same shattering, brittle laugh. "Divorce me! You couldn't even fund the filing fee, you fool! I'll take—" She went quiet. Something shifted behind her eyes. A final ghastly understanding arrived. There's nothing left to take." "Correct," I said from across the table. The last thread holding Celeste together snapped. Her face folded, and what poured out was a fury so raw it was almost primal. She wrenched the enormous glittering diamond bought with borrowed money he would never repay straight off her finger. "Fine," she screamed. "You want it back here, not at the floor." She launched it directly at his face. Damon lurched sideways, and the ring, a fortune he had never actually owned, cracked against the glass wall behind him with a sharp, hard report. "I would sooner walk back through my parents' door," she said, her voice dripping poison, "than waste another breath standing next to a broke, pathetic wreck like you." She seized Vivian by the arm. "We're leaving. I'm calling my lawyer. I want an annulment." Vivian, looking hollowed out, a decade older than she had an hour ago, let her daughter steer her out of the room. Gerald Hartwell left last. He paid no attention to his wife or daughter as he went. At the door he paused, turned and fixed his gaze on me. Dead eyes. Cold eyes. Eyes filled with a hatred you could almost reach out and grip. "You," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You enjoyed every second of this. You orchestrated the whole spectacle. You know Gerald," I said, keeping my eyes steady on his. "I didn't orchestrate anything. I lived quietly and minded my business. You were the architects of this. You conspired. You came here dripping with arrogance. All I did was make sure I had a better way out than you did." He held my gaze for a long, charged moment, the unspoken promise of future legal warfare hanging between us like smoke. Then he turned and walked out, and the heavy door swung shut behind him. The latch caught with a click that rang through the room like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Silence poured in. The noise, Celeste's shrieking, Gerald's threats. All of it was gone, drawn out of the air, as if it had never been there. Every last one of them had cleared out. The Hartwells with their borrowed prestige and genuine malice. Celeste with her hunger and her venom. All of it gone, like waking up and finding the nightmare had ended. All except Damon. He hadn't moved. He couldn't. He sat crumpled on the floor beside the conference room door, 38 years old, suit wrecked, weeping into his own hands. In the space of 15 minutes, he had lost his wife, his in-laws, the house, and a $35 million future that had never belonged to him. He had nothing left, nobody left. He was in every sense alone. Carolyn released a long, unsteady breath and lowered herself into her seat. Nadine, my niece, drifted quietly over to stand at her shoulder, laying a hand on her in comfort. Everett Crane, my attorney, betrayed nothing. He moved back to his place at the head of the table, lifted the signed 10-page care and property transfer agreement. The confession squared it against the tabletop and slid it into a clean, unmarked folder. Damon stayed where he was kneeling on that expensive rug, his whole body racked with deep, gasping, suffocating sobs. The sounds coming out of him were the sounds of someone who has finally grasped, far too late, the full size of the hole they've fallen into. I searched myself for something to feel. Anger, pity, anything at all. What I found was emptiness, a wide, aching grief for the child I had known, and the man that child had chosen not to become. I gave him a full, heavy minute. He needed to sit at the very bottom of everything he had built and destroyed. Everett cleared his throat. Mr. Drummond. Damon's whole body jerked at the sound of his formal name. He hauled himself up off the floor in stages slow, as though each movement cost him something. His face was ravaged, puffy red, streaked with tears, the suit ruined. He looked at Everett with eyes that had gone wide with fear. Please, Damon rasped, barely a whisper. Just let me walk out of here. I'll find a motel, I'll disappear. I won't come near you. I've got nothing left. We all know it's finished. Everett regarded him without a flicker of sympathy. You're mistaken, Mr. Drummond. There is quite a bit you still have. Damon blinked. What are you talking about? Criminal exposure, Everett said flatly. Damon's head came up fast. Criminal what? No. This was a family disagreement, an inheritance dispute. You won. It's done. Walk away. This was never about the inheritance, Damon. Everett's voice shifted, dropping lower, sharpening into something clean and prosecutorial. This meeting existed to lock down the evidence against you. You're operating under a serious misunderstanding if you think the door closes here. It closes in a federal courtroom. Evidence of what? Everett reached into his briefcase and produced a fresh, yellow legal pad. He clicked his pen open. Let's go through the list. First, conspiracy to commit felony elder fraud. You, your wife, and your in-laws worked together to strip your parents of their lawful property by filing false claims of mental incompetence. He lifted the stack of signed documents. A charge to which every person in this room has now provided a notarized written confession, witnessed and certified. Damon's hands began to shake, a tremor that moved up through his arms. No, we only thought... Second, Everett kept writing without looking up. Attempted wire fraud and bank fraud, both federal offenses. 3 months ago, you and Gerald Hartwell appeared in person at First Lone Star Trust Bank and petitioned the board to seize the Drummond Trust's assets, presenting fabricated claims about your father's mental fitness. The security footage from that branch is clear. The branch manager's memory is clearer. I was concerned about him, genuinely worried. Third, Everett's pen didn't pause. Forgery attempting to exercise authority over trust accounts under false pretenses. And last, my personal favorite, felony elder abuse. A deliberate, sustained campaign of emotional and psychological harm inflicted upon 2 people over the age of 65, carried out for direct financial benefit. In this state, that charge brings a mandatory minimum prison term. The word dropped into the room and stayed there. Prison. Damon's face cycled from white to a greenish, waxy gray. The crying had stopped entirely. He looked like a man fighting down nausea. Jail, he breathed. You're talking about me going to jail. Prison. Everett said, his voice stripped of all warmth. Men such as Gerald Hartwell, white-collar criminals of his type, they go to prison. But a man who buries himself under $750,000 in gambling losses and then schemes to rob his own elderly parents to climb out, judges reserve a particular contempt for that man. Damon's knees gave. He dropped back into the nearest chair and sat there undone. His eyes moved past Everett, past Carolyn, and came to rest on me, wide open, terrified, begging without words. Dad. The word came out strangled. Dad, please. You wouldn't do this. He lurched up from the chair and landed on his knees in front of me, clutching the fabric of my new $2,200 midnight Navy suit. Dad, please. You can't send your own son to prison. This wasn't me. It was Celeste. It was her family. They got inside my head. They said everyone does this, that it was normal. I was drowning. I love you, Dad. I have always loved you. Please, please don't do this to me. I looked down at my 38-year-old son folded up on the floor at my feet. You love me, I said. The words came out rough, like something dragged across gravel. You went to a bank and told strangers I was out of my mind. You wanted me declared incompetent and warehoused in a facility somewhere. You stood at my own kitchen table and informed me I ought to be grateful for a room in my own basement. And you're telling me that's love. I was frightened. You were greedy, I said. And what you are right now is pathetic. You want to know whether I'd send my son to prison. Here's a question back. Would a son try to send his father to a mental ward? I let it sit. You answered that question already, last night, in my kitchen. I lifted my eyes to Everett. Everett, is there a path that lets him avoid prosecution? Damon's face snapped upward, wet and wrecked, and something desperate and new ignited behind his eyes. Yes, Everett said. As I informed Mr. Drummond before this meeting began, he is conditionally merciful. He is prepared to instruct my office to keep this entire airtight file away from the district attorney. Anything, Damon cried out, still on his knees. I'll do anything. Dad, I swear it. Anything. Subject to one, Everett said, very specific set of conditions. They are absolute. There is no room for negotiation. Are we clear? Damon nodded wildly. Yes, just tell me. First, Everett said, you will sign a full detailed written confession of your conduct already drafted by my team based on the document you signed earlier. Second, you will execute the divorce papers we are preparing at this moment, citing irreconcilable differences and waiving all claims to any community property, present or future. Third, you will consent to a permanent 500-meter restraining order against Celeste Hartwell and her parents. We cannot allow you to be drawn back under their influence. Yes, absolutely, I'll do it, Damon said, reaching for it like a drowning man reaching for rope. Is that everything? I'll sign it all. I'll sign it right now. And fourth, Everett said, his voice falling lower. The most important condition of all, the one your father, Mr. Drummond, crafted himself. Damon was still on his knees, eyes fixed upward on Everett, braced for whatever came next. He was a man backed into a corner, stripped down, ready to accept anything. But before Everett could continue, Carolyn raised her hand. Wait, Everett, hold on. She had been a ghost in this room the entire time, silent, still absorbing every ugly revelation as it broke over her. Now she rose from her seat. She moved past me, past Nadine, and positioned herself directly above her son. I anticipated the softness I had always known in her. I expected to see her weep, but what I found on her face was something I had rarely seen there. It was hard. I have to stop here and tell you something about Carolyn. Not the way she appeared in that room to the Hartwells, the quiet wife sitting off to the side saying nothing. I need to tell you who she actually is. Carolyn and I have been married for 41 years. 41 years. She was the one who packed the lunches and attended every school play and stayed up through the night when Damon had his tonsils out at age 7. She was the one who drove 2 hours each way to sit in a folding chair at every single one of his college track meets, even the ones where it rained the entire time. She was the one who, when I nearly lost the company in the recession of 2000, told me every morning, "We built it once, we'll build it again." And we did. She was the one who taught him to ride a bike on the sidewalk in front of 417 Cypress Mill Road when he was 5. Who made him genuinely apologize face to face when he broke Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball and tried to pretend it wasn't him. Who sat beside him at age 16 after his first real heartbreak and said nothing, just stayed close because sometimes staying close is the whole of it. She loved that boy with everything she had. Everything. And he had stood in her kitchen, the kitchen she had cooked in and cleaned for 30 years. The kitchen where she had made Carolyn's slow-roasted chicken and the peach cobbler that Damon used to ask for every birthday, and told her she should be grateful for a room in the basement. Now she stood over him, and I saw something in her bearing that I had not seen in 41 years of knowing this woman. A line had been crossed. Not for her as a wife, as a mother. And when a mother crosses that line, really crosses it, there is no going back. She looked down at Damon without flinching. "I want to say something to you," she said, "and I need you to hear every word." Damon looked up at her. He was still on his knees. Something in her face made him go very still. "I carried you," she said. 9 months. I was in labor for 16 hours. Do you know what I said when they first put you in my arms? She didn't wait for his answer. I said, "He looks just like his father." And I cried. Not from pain. From something I still don't have a proper word for. "Mom, don't." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I am not finished. I watched you grow up in that house. I watched you become someone I was proud of. Smart. Funny. Kind, you were kind. Damon, you were. And then I watched you let those people dismantle all of it piece by piece until the boy I raised was somewhere I couldn't find him anymore." Her jaw tightened. "You sat at my table and ate my food. You accepted everything this family ever gave you, the education, the down payment your father quietly made on your first apartment, that we never once mentioned the calls I made to get you your first interview at that firm. And then you walked into a bank with a lawyer and told strangers your father had lost his mind. You told them he was a danger to himself." Her voice finally wavered. "Just once. That man who has never in 41 years done a single thing that was not for this family." Damon's face broke open. "Mom, I know, I'm sorry. You told them," she said, "that the basement was a reasonable place to put us." The room went completely silent. "I want you to understand something," Carolyn said. "Your father built this condition himself, the 4th one. And when Everett explained it to me this morning before you all arrived, I sat with it. I turned it over. I thought about whether it was too much." A pause. "It isn't." She stepped back and nodded at Everett. "Go ahead." Everett looked at Damon with the composed, level gaze of a man who has said difficult things in difficult rooms many times before. "The 4th condition," he said, "is this. For a period of 2 years from the date of this agreement, you will report to a licensed financial counselor approved by this office on a monthly basis at your own expense. You will submit to quarterly financial audits conducted by my firm to verify that you are not accruing new gambling debts. You will complete a minimum of 200 hours of community service at a facility serving elderly residents in this city. And you will have no contact whatsoever with the Hartwells, Gerald, Vivian, or Celeste for the duration of those 2 years, except through legal counsel. He let that settle. Should you violate any single term of this agreement, this entire file goes to the district attorney the same day. No warning. No second conversation. It goes. Everett set down his pen and folded his hands on the table. Those are your father's terms, Mr. Drummond. All 4 of them. Do you accept? Damon was still on his knees. He looked at me, then at Carolyn, then back at me. He had nothing left to bargain with. No money, no wife, no in-laws standing behind him with a strategy. Just the bare truth of what he had done, and the man who was still, in spite of all of it, offering him a way to walk out of this room as a free person. And yes, Damon said. His voice was barely there. I accept. It was the face of a mother whose betrayal ran all the way to her bones. Before we get to conditions, she said, her voice unsteady but carrying every word. There's one thing I have to know. Damon lifted his eyes to her, his face completely undone. Mom, anything. Why? She asked. The simplest question in the world, and the most impossible. Why, Damon? We loved you. We gave you everything. We worked ourselves to the bone. Your father built this legacy, this secret, all of it, to shield you. And you tried to tear him apart. You looked at us, your own parents, and what you saw were a burden and a wall standing in your way. What did we do? What did I do to make you despise us like this? That question landed harder than any legal threat ever could. This was his mother asking him when he had turned into something she no longer recognized. Damon had no answer. He just broke. He buried his face in both hands, and his sobs filled the silent, expensive room. I don't hate you. He choked out, his voice muffled behind his palms. I don't. You just what Carolyn demanded, what could possibly have mattered more than us. He looked up, and the truth, the ugly, pitiful truth, finally came flooding out. I was ashamed. He cried the words, tearing free from somewhere deep. I was always ashamed. Ashamed of what we gave you, a good home. We gave you an education. You never understood, he said, looking at me through wet eyes. You never did. I grew up in that modest house, that plain, unassuming house. I went to a state university while every friend I had was heading off to Yale and Harvard. You were an architect, Dad, but you drove a 10-year-old Buick and patched your own roof. Mom, you kept the house, but you clipped coupons and bought everything on sale. You called it frugal. You called it valuing labor. He let out that same cracked, hollow laugh. You know what my friends called it? They called it poor. They called it cheap. So you were ashamed of us, I said. It wasn't a question. He kept going as if he hadn't heard me. I met Celeste and her family, Gerald, Vivian. They had things. Not just money. They had a kind of polish, a way of carrying themselves. They talked about summers in the Hamptons, skiing and Gstad clubs I'd never even heard of. They were better. They are criminals, Nadine said, speaking up for the first time. I didn't know that then. Damon snapped at her. I just knew they were everything I wasn't. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted Celeste, and to get her, I had to lie. I told her you were old money. I told her you were eccentric, that the modesty was a choice, that underneath it you were quietly loaded. He looked at me, a bitter, ironic glint in his eyes. Turns out I wasn't even lying about that part, was I? You were loaded. You just never told me. And the lie kept growing. His voice dropped to a near whisper. I had to buy her the ring, took out a loan. I had to take her on trips we had no business taking, took out another one. Then I had to keep up. The condo, the car, the dinners, the furnishings. I told myself I just needed one big score. One clean win. Pay it all back. Live the life I'd been performing. But you never won, I said. I never won, he whispered. I just lost and lost and lost. So you came for us, Carolyn said, her voice flat as stone. When the lies had nowhere left to go, you came for us. Damon nodded his shoulders, caving under the full weight of it. Celeste's parents were coming to town. They wanted to see the estate. They wanted to meet the eccentric in-laws. I was cornered. The moment they set foot in the house, the moment they laid eyes on you, it was over. They would have seen exactly who you were. Ordinary people, and you couldn't live with that. No, I said. You couldn't. So the plan to have me declared incompetent, whose idea was that I pressed. Gerald's, he said, reaching for the excuse like a lifeline. He called it standard procedure for high-net-worth families. Estate planning, he said. Protecting assets from erratic decisions. I went along with it. I thought if I could just get hold of the money, I could quietly fix everything before you even noticed anything was missing. And when that fell apart, what was the plan last night, Damon? He stared at the floor. He wouldn't lift his head. Tell me. It was desperation, he mumbled. Celeste and her parents, they said we had to seize control. That you were an obstacle, a burden. They said if we moved in, took over, made you feel like you had no power left, you would eventually fold. Fold. Carolyn repeated, her voice hollowed out with horror. You were trying to crush our will. We were going to sell the house, he admitted. Use the money to wipe out the most pressing debts. Move you and Dad into a nice facility. A high-end one. We thought you'd be better off there around people your own age. A facility I said you were going to sell the home I built with my own hands, use the proceeds to cover your gambling debts, and lock us away in a nursing home while you did it, he stammered. You were ashamed of us, Damon. I said it slowly, the final cold truth settling into the room like frost. You were ashamed of the life we built, so you decided to steal it, strip it down for parts, and discard us all to impress a family of con artists and crooks. He had nothing to say. He just knelt there while the full, wretched shape of his life lay exposed. He was a weak man, a gambler, a liar, who had tried to gut his own parents out of nothing more than shame. Damon's confession hung in the air like something thick and toxic. He was still on his knees, a broken 38-year-old man who had just laid bare the fact that he had thrown everything away because he was embarrassed by us. By our love. Carolyn, who had been standing over him rigid with a mother's particular kind of anguish, slowly raised her right hand. I saw it coming. I did not move. The sound of her palm against his cheek rang off the high ceiling. It was not soft. It was a hard, sharp slap that snapped Damon's head sideways. That, she said, her voice trembling with a fury I had not once heard in 45 years beside her. That is for making me cry. That is for the terror you put us through. That is for standing in my kitchen and scheming to put your father and me out like we were furniture. Damon didn't flinch. He held still, head down, a red mark rising on his cheek. I thought that was it. I thought she had rendered her verdict. But then she did something that cracked something loose in me, too. A great, shuddering sob broke from her, and she sank to the floor in front of him. She drew his head against her chest, folded both arms around him, and held him the way she had when he was small. And this, she wept, her tears dropping into his hair. This is because you are still my son. You are my son, And you are a fool, a terrible, terrible fool. But you are still my son. Whatever was left of Damon's composure, whatever thin shell had survived, it shattered completely. He let out a sound that came from somewhere far below words. He clung to her face, pressed into her shoulder, and they stayed there on the floor together, two halves of the same broken thing, crying for what he had nearly destroyed. Nadine turned away and walked to the window, giving them that much. Everett looked at me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes asked plainly, "What now, Walter?" I let them cry for a full minute. Let the poison have its moment. But this was not an ending. This was where the consequences started. I walked over to them. "Carolyn," I said, my voice firm but not without feeling. "That's enough." I laid my hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, her face streaked and raw. "Everett, Nadine," I said, "would you give us a moment, please, just the three of us?" Everett gave a single nod. He and Nadine rose and slipped out of the conference room, pulling the heavy door shut behind them, leaving just my wife, my son, and me. I looked at Damon still on his knees, and at Carolyn now sitting on the floor beside him. "Get up, Damon," I said. He sniffled, dragging his sleeve across his nose, rumpled and expensive and utterly diminished. He rose slowly, painfully, and stood before me, head down, shoulders folded in. "You have two paths," I said, my voice gone cold and hard as iron. "Listen to every word. Everett and I have put together a file. It holds the bank records, a statement from the bank manager, the audio recordings of your Plan B conversation, and the signed confessions you and your criminal in-laws just provided. It is enough to send you Celeste and both her parents to prison for a very long time. That is Path A. You and I and your mother never speak again." Damon's eyes went wide with raw terror. "Dad, no. You said there were conditions." "I did," I said. "And that is Path B. You will stay out of prison, Damon. No criminal charges from me, but you will pay for what you did. You will pay in a way that finally gets through to you. And these conditions are not up for debate. You agree to every one of them right here, right now, or I call Everett back in, and he walks that file directly to the district attorney's office. Are we clear? Yes, yes, Dad, clear." He was nodding frantically, eyes wild with desperation. "Anything. I'll do anything." "Good." I started to pace. "First, you are going into treatment, not just therapy. You are a gambler. You have an addiction. You will check into a 30-day inpatient program and follow it with outpatient meetings for as long as the doctors say you need to. Are we clear? Yes, Dad. Second, you will get a job. I don't care what kind. You can sweep floors, flip burgers, drive a truck. You will earn a paycheck with your body. And with that paycheck, you will begin paying back the $750,000 you owe not to me to the trust. With interest. You will not see a single penny from me, from your mother, or from the trust. Your inheritance is gone. Permanently. Are we clear?" He swallowed hard. The weight of a lifetime of working-class labor, of debt stretching out as far as he could see, was landing on him all at once. But he looked at me then, at the prison door waiting on the other side of Path A, and he nodded. "Yes, I understand. I will." Third, the Hartwells, Celeste, her entire family. That is finished. Everett is drawing up the divorce papers as we speak. You will sign them. You will file a permanent 500-foot restraining order against all three of them. You will never see them, speak to them, or reach out to them in any form for the rest of your life. They are poison, Damon. They got into you and you let it happen. That ends today. Are we clear? He didn't hesitate. Yes, clear. It's done. I know. Good, I said. I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of him. And fourth, you will accept your punishment." Damon looked up at me, his eyes swimming with fear. "Punishment," I said. "The job, the debt. That isn't punishment, son. That is simply what a grown man does. That is cleaning up the mess you made. No, I mean a real punishment. A consequence. Something you feel every single day, something that reminds you exactly what you were willing to become." "What?" he whispered. "What is it?" I let the silence hold for a moment. I glanced at Carolyn. She gave me a slow nod, her face still carrying the stain of tears, but her eyes were steady. She was with me. "You're going to come home," I said. The relief that flooded Damon's face was so overwhelming, he nearly buckled. "Home. Oh, Dad, thank you. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I cut him off. "You are not coming back as our son. You are coming back as our tenant. Nadine is the new owner of this property. She will be your landlady. I can pay rent," he stammered, "with my new job." "Oh, you'll pay rent," I said, "but not in money. You'll pay it in sweat. You are going to live in the basement." His face went still. The basement. The guest room in the basement. The very room you and your wife so generously picked out for me and your mother. That will be your new home. It's comfortable. It's convenient. It's just steps from the laundry room. And as you so correctly pointed out, once one person doesn't really need all that much space, you will live there. And in exchange for your rent, you will be the property's live-in handyman. You will fix the roof, Damon. You'll clear the drains. You will paint the fences. You will cut the grass. With your own hands, you will learn what it takes to keep the very house you were so eager to steal and sell. Every day until the debt is paid, not just to the trust, but to this family. Do you accept these conditions? He stared at me, the full crushing weight of his humiliation and his fall bearing down on him all at once. He had gone from a $35 million heir to a broke, divorced gambler sentenced to live in his parents' basement as a handyman. It was exactly as I had intended, a fate worse than prison. It was justice. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. And he gave one slow, defeated nod. "Yes, Dad," he whispered. "I accept." 1 month later, the house at 417 Cypress Mill Road was not the same place. It was lighter. The strangling, suffocating tension that had pressed down on our lives for years had lifted, replaced by something I hadn't known I was missing. The sound of an ordinary, happy home. Nadine and her husband Curtis, a calm and solid man who taught high school physics, had moved in 2 weeks after that day at Everett's office. They took the 2 guest rooms on the 2nd floor. Nadine, it turned out, was 6 months pregnant, something she had been too afraid to share with anyone in the middle of all the family wreckage. The moment Carolyn found out, she was transformed. The haunted, wounded woman who had walked out of Everett's office simply disappeared, and the mother I had married for 45 years came back. Her grief over Damon's betrayal found a new channel, a fierce, joyful focus on getting ready for her grandnephew. The house, silent for so long, filled up again with Carolyn and Nadine laughing together in the kitchen, bickering over nursery paint colors and baking. Lord, I had missed the smell of Carolyn's baking. She hadn't baked for the pleasure of it in years. Now the house carried the scent of cinnamon and vanilla and apple pie at all hours. Carolyn and I were back in our bedroom, our sanctuary. Life was settling into a new rhythm, a better one. Nadine and Curtis insisted on covering the groceries every week. Curtis, it turned out, had a gift for gardening and spent his weekends beating back the weeds that had taken over the backyard. We were a family, a different one than I had imagined, but a real one. And then there was Damon. Damon lived in the basement. He had come back from the 30-day inpatient gambling addiction program just the week before. He was thinner. The arrogance that had been the defining feature of his face for so long was stripped away, leaving a hollow-eyed, quiet man I barely knew anymore. He had kept his word. He had found work. He was stocking shelves and mixing paint at the local True Value hardware store. Every evening at exactly 6:15, I would hear the side door ease open and close. I would watch from the kitchen window as my 38-year-old son, crossed the yard and disappeared into the basement entrance. He was not the man in the sharp charcoal pinstripe suit any longer. He came home dusted in drywall powder, his hair matted flat with sweat, his fingernails ground in with grease and paint that wouldn't wash out. He looked worn through. He looked broken. But he also looked real. He did not sit at our table for dinner. That was part of the arrangement. His meals were his own concern. He ate alone in the basement room. He was a tenant, a handyman. He was serving his sentence. He did not speak to me, and I did not speak to him. We shared the same house as two separate worlds. Carolyn would look at me across the room, her eyes pleading, asking me to say something, to extend some small mercy. I held firm. This was not the kind of wound you could close with a simple, "I'm sorry." This was a debt, and it had to be paid in full, in sweat and humility and time. That evening, I was alone in the kitchen, while Carolyn and Nadine were upstairs. I was filling a glass of water when I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. A steady, nagging, patient leak from the kitchen faucet I had put in myself 15 years ago. I sighed. I looked at the drip. Then I checked the clock. 6:13 p.m. I waited. At 6:15 on the dot, the side door opened. I watched Damon pass by the window, head down, shoulders rounded, his lunchbox hanging at his side. I dried my hands and walked to the basement door. I opened it and went down the stairs. The room was clean, spare, a single bed, made with care, a small desk, a hot plate in the corner. Damon was standing in the middle of the floor, pulling off his heavy paint-stained work boots. He froze the moment he saw me. He looked like something cornered. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. "The faucet," I said, my voice flat, all business. "The kitchen one. It's leaking. Probably a worn seal. I need you to fix it." Damon held my gaze for a moment. A flicker of the old Damon surfaced in his eyes, the marketing director, who didn't fix things, the man who paid other people for that. I looked straight back at him without blinking. The flicker died. He dropped his eyes to his dirty hands. "Okay," he said quietly. I'll need to go back to the store tomorrow. Get a new O-ring set for that model." "Fine," I said. "See that you do. Nadine needs the kitchen for dinner." I turned and headed for the stairs. I was halfway up when I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Your mother," I said, my back still to him. "She made that chicken cacciatore you like. There's a plate waiting for you on the stove." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the room below. I waited. Then came a sound, small, choked, barely audible. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was thick. "Please tell her. Tell her, thank you." I stood there a moment longer, one hand on the railing. I was not ready to forgive him, not even close, but I knew what I was looking at. "You're paying your rent, Damon," I said, still facing the wall. "You're getting your hands dirty. You're doing the work." I paused, and the last words came out heavy with the weight of everything we had lost and everything still broken between us. "For the first time in your life, you're doing it on your own." I went up the stairs and pulled the door closed, leaving him alone in the basement with his tools and the dinner his mother had set aside for him. The phone rang 2 weeks later. It was Everett. His voice was crisp, efficient, carrying the quiet note of something finally finished. "Walter," he said, "I wanted to give you the last update on the Hartwell side of things. It's officially over. I was at the kitchen table working through a cup of coffee. Through the window, I could see Carolyn and Nadine out in the backyard, settled on the porch swing, talking with their hands about the baby coming. "What happened, Everett?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Gerald Hartwell. Everett Began was taken in by federal agents an hour ago, right on the 9th hole at his golf club." I closed my eyes. Justice. The SEC investigation we had surfaced was the final nail, Everett continued. "He wasn't merely borrowing from his clients, Walter. He was running a full Ponzi scheme. He's looking at 20 years minimum. He is not getting out." I thought of that arrogant, dismissive man who had laughed in my face and told me I was irrelevant. A man who measured everyone by the size of their account. His, it turned out, had been built entirely on air. "And Vivian?" I asked. "Completely wiped out," Everett said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction underneath the words. Every account she had was tied directly to his fraudulent operation. "The house has been seized by federal authorities. The cars are gone. According to my investigator, she's currently staying in a Motel 6, functionally bankrupt, and she had the nerve," Everett added, "to call my office and demand that the Drummond Trust cover her legal fees. She claimed she was a victim of my aggressive tactics." "What did you do?" "I sent her a bill," Everett said flatly, "for the emotional distress she caused my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Drummond. She won't be calling again. The Hartwells, Walter, are finished socially, financially, and legally. They flew too close to the sun, and they got burned." A quiet sense of order settled over me. Not joy, just completion, and the daughter I asked. I couldn't make myself say her name. Celeste. "She's been busy," Everett said. "How so?" "She filed for divorce the moment she could, exactly as she had threatened. Her attorney, a real shark out of a downtown firm, filed a motion to seize all of Damon's assets as emergency alimony. She was still convinced, even after everything, that the $35 million was tucked away somewhere. Still certain we were running some elaborate bluff." "What happened?" I asked, though the answer was already taking shape. Everett actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. It was anticlimactic. We had Damon submit his last 3 pay stubs from the True Value hardware store. We provided a notarized copy of his new lease agreement for the basement room. We showed his bank account, which currently carries a balance of $212.48. I could picture Celeste's face. Her attorney, Everett said with deep satisfaction, withdrew from the case this morning. He cited non-payment of services. Apparently Celeste couldn't afford her own shark. She has no job, no marketable skills, and her parents' credit cards are now just useless pieces of plastic. She gets nothing, so she's left with nothing. She walks away with exactly what she brought into this family, Everett confirmed. A bad attitude and a wardrobe full of expensive, out-of-fashion clothes. There was a brief pause. "Don't waste too much sympathy on her, though," Everett added. My investigator did one final follow-up, purely out of professional habit. "She's already back on the circuit. She was seen last night at a gala at the Art Museum working her way toward a 90-year-old oil baron. She's lining up her next mark." I shook my head slowly, a small, bitter smile crossing my lips. "Some people never change, Everett." "No, Walt," he replied. "They don't, but we do. And Damon is learning. That, I think, is what matters." His words settled in the air between us, so Everett asked, his voice going softer. "All business concluded. The Hartwells are gone. Celeste is gone. Damon is paying his dues. The last question is, are you happy, Walter? After all of this, was it worth it?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted back to the window. Carolyn and Nadine were still on the porch swing, laughing together. In the yard, I could see Curtis, Nadine's husband, standing beside our old, stubborn push mower, and standing next to him was Damon, covered in grease, his hands black with it. The engine cover was open, and the two of them had their heads bent over it. Curtis was pointing at something inside. Damon listened. He nodded. He wasn't the polished marketing director anymore. He wasn't the arrogant, defeated son. He was just a man learning to fix something, learning to do the work I had always done myself. I watched as Damon finally pulled the starter cord. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then caught and roared. He climbed into the seat, engaged the gear, and slowly, carefully drew the first straight line across the grass. I turned back to the phone. Happy is a complicated word, Everett, I said. I'm not happy that my son is a broken man. I'm not happy that I had to tear his life apart in order to salvage it. But Everett said gently. But I said, my voice thickening. I look out this window, and I see my wife smiling for the first time in years. I see my niece, who has been more of a daughter to me than my son ever managed to be safe and settled under this roof. I hear laughter in this house again. I watched Damon make another slow pass across the lawn, his face set in concentration. And what I see out there, I finished, is a man. A man who might one day be worth something. I'm not happy, Everett, but I'm at peace. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm getting there. Getting closer. Thanks to you. That's all I needed to hear. Walt, take care of that family. I will, I said. The real one. I set the phone down. 6 months had passed since that day in Everett's office. 6 months since the old rotten structure of my family had finally given way. Winter had run its course, and now a cool spring evening was settling over the house. Sunday dinner at 417 Cypress Mill Road had once been a performance, a strained, stilted affair where Carolyn and I pretended, and Damon and Celeste pretended right back, all of us swallowing the same unspoken resentments and lies. But this was something else. The table was laid for 5. The air in the dining room wasn't heavy. It was light. It smelled of Carolyn's slow-roasted chicken and the peach cobbler Nadine had baked. Curtis, Nadine's husband, was in the middle of a story about a student in his physics class who had tried to argue that gravity was a matter of personal opinion. Carolyn was laughing, a full, deep laugh I hadn't heard in years. She and Nadine were sitting close together. Nadine was 8 months along now, glowing and round with it, and Carolyn fussed over her without apology. All her grief over Damon's betrayal poured into this new, fierce purpose. I'm telling you, Carolyn Gray is too cold, Nadine said, jabbing her fork for emphasis. Nonsense, Carolyn shot back, eyes bright. Gray is calming. We add accents, yellow ducks. It'll be beautiful. We don't want the baby to be overstimulated, do we? They looked happy. My wife, who had been a ghost drifting through her own home, was alive again. She had something to look forward to. She was going to be a grandmother in everything but name. And at the far end of the table, sitting in the chair that Gerald Hartwell had once tried to claim for himself, was Damon. He was quiet. He ate eyes on his plate. He had been living in the basement for 6 months, working at the hardware store for 5. He looked different. The arrogance that had defined him for so long had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow-eyed, quiet man in its place. His hands told the whole story. They were no longer the soft hands of a marketing director. They were rough now. Knuckles calloused, fingernails clean but permanently darkened around the edges. They were the hands of a man who worked. He didn't sit at our table every night, but Sunday was becoming its own kind of tradition. It was Nadine who had pushed for it. He's part of this household, Uncle Walter. He does the work. He should eat with the family. He listened at dinner. He didn't cut in. He didn't hold court. He didn't put on any kind of performance. He was simply there. Damon Curtis said, drawing him into the conversation. That repair you did on the attic insulation. Remarkable. Our room is 10 degrees warmer. Damon looked up, caught off guard at being addressed. Oh, it was just some fiberglass batting. The old material had compressed. I found a draft along the north-facing eave. Well, whatever you did, Nadine smiled over at him. It worked. Thank you. Damon gave a small nod, a faint flush creeping up his neck. You're welcome. He turned back to his plate. He wasn't the center of attention. He wasn't the heir apparent. He was just the man who lived in the basement. The man who fixed things. And for the first time, that seemed like it might be enough. After dinner, Carolyn and Nadine started gathering the plates, bickering cheerfully over who got the last piece of cake. Curtis headed upstairs to read. I did what I always do. I went out to the front porch. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the smell of spring settling in. I lowered myself into my old rocking chair, the one my own father had built with his hands, and looked out at the quiet street. 417 Cypress Mill Road. It was my house again. I heard the screen door creak open and fall shut behind me. It was Damon. He stood near the door for a moment, hands working nervously in the pockets of his clean jeans. He looked uneasy. Dad, he said. His voice was low. Damon. I answered without turning around. I kept rocking. He came around and stood in front of me, stepping into my line of sight. He looked smaller, not broken exactly, just human. Can I talk to you for a minute? I'm listening. He drew a slow breath. His rough hands trembled slightly as he pulled them free of his pockets. In his right hand, he was holding 2 envelopes, plain white business envelopes slightly creased. This is the first one, he said, extending it toward me. It was thick. It's the rent for the basement room. I'm 2 days late. I'm sorry. My paycheck didn't clear until this afternoon. I looked at him. Then I looked at the envelope. His rent, as I had set out, was his labor, his work on the house. This was something different. What is this? I asked. Nadine and Curtis, he said, still not meeting my eyes. They're having a baby. The work I do that takes care of the house fine, but they need money for diapers, for things. It's my paycheck from the hardware store. All of it. This month's, it's $512. Please tell Nadine. It's for the baby. I held the envelope. $512. The man who had gambled away $500,000 was now handing over every dollar he had earned. All right, I said, and set it on the small table at my side. I'll make sure she gets it, and he said, his voice dropping lower. He held out the second envelope. This one was thin. This is the other thing. I took it from him. It weighed almost nothing. It's not much, he said, and the shame in his voice was a different kind than before. This wasn't the shame of a man embarrassed by where he came from. This was the shame of a man who owed a debt and knew it. It's $100. It's everything I could set aside after the rent. But it's the first one. I looked at him. The first what? The first payment, he said, and this time he met my eyes, for the $750,000. I know it's next to nothing. I know it'll take forever. But it's a start. $100. I'll have another 100 next month. Maybe more if I pick up overtime. He stood there exposed, offering this small, enormous thing. I turned the thin envelope over in my hands. $100 against a debt of $750,000. It was nothing. It was almost laughable, and it was at the same time the most meaningful payment I had ever held. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked up at my son. You're right, I said, my voice thickening. It's not much. At this pace, it will take you more than 600 years to settle what you owe Damon." He flinched, but he held my gaze. He didn't reach for an excuse. He just stood there and received the truth. "I know, sir," he whispered. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the envelope with the $100 into the breast pocket of my shirt, right over my heart. "All right," I said, pressing my hand flat against the pocket. "One payment down. A long road ahead." A single tear broke loose and tracked down his cheek. He scrubbed it away with the back of his rough hand, almost angry about it. "Yes, sir." He held his ground for another moment. "The faucet in the kitchen. I fixed it. It won't drip anymore." "Good," I said. "Good work." He nodded as though I had handed him something rare. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, son." He turned and walked back toward the basement entrance, his shoulders squared. I sat out there on the porch for a long while, rocking in my father's chair. I could hear Carolyn and Nadine laughing faintly as they washed the dishes inside. I could hear the distant sounds of the city beyond the street. I felt the cool spring air against my face. Everett had asked me if I was happy. No. Happiness was too clean a word for what this was. I had lost my son, the brilliant, arrogant, deceitful, weak marketing director. That version of him was gone for good. I had been the one to destroy him. But sitting there in the dark, my hand resting against my chest, feeling the small, crinkled envelope beneath my fingers, I understood something. In the wreckage, I had found something I hadn't gone looking for. I had found a man who was paying what he owed, a man who repaired what was broken, a man who was learning the hard and necessary way how to build a life rather than simply purchase the appearance of one. I had lost the son I believed I wanted, but I had finally found the man I had always needed him to become. I closed my eyes, and that is where I will leave Walter Drummond, sitting in the dark on his father's porch, one hand pressed to his chest, feeling that small, crinkled envelope over his heart. This story cost more than I can easily put into words. A son who grew up loved and provided for somehow convinced himself that love was poverty and that fraud was ambition. Walter had to tear down everything his son had built, the lies, the status, the arrogance, before anything real could grow back in its place. I believe God has a way of restoring what seemed permanently broken, but he tends to do it slowly and on his own terms, not ours. That truth settled into me sitting in that rocking chair. If this family's story taught me anything worth passing on, it is this. First, never let shame drive your decisions. Shame will convince you the life you were given is something to escape when it may be exactly what you were meant to build on. Second, the people who flash their wealth the loudest are often the ones with the least ground beneath their feet. Real security is quiet. Third, a true punishment is not a cage, it is a mirror. Make a person face what they did day after day with their own hands, and eventually they may find their way back to themselves. Fourth, protect what you have built. Whether you are navigating a family conflict or simply watching from the outside a family revenge story like this one, is a reminder that trust must be earned continuously, not assumed because of blood. This story is for anyone in the adults 50-plus community who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly taken for granted by the very people they sacrificed for. You are not finished. You are not irrelevant. And the accounts do get settled. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell me your thoughts. I read them. And if you have not yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, I hope today is the day you do. Thank you for listening and for giving this story the time it deserved. Until next time, take care of yourself.